Americans love to talk about all the rights we have. It's virtually a national pastime to do that. But we don't spend very much time discussing the reason why these rights exist, why it is that they matter so much. That's definitely true of free speech for sure, and it's at least as true of due process. Like free speech, due process is both a constitutional guarantee and a societal value. The constitutional right is straightforward. The 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution provide that neither the federal government nor the states may, quote, deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. That right did not materialize out of nowhere. For centuries, institutions of power had imprisoned people or seized their property or even killed them based on highly dubious and unproven accusations. Like all of the guarantees in the Bill of Rights, due process was designed to prevent abuses of power by the state that the founders had seen being undertaken for centuries throughout history. By requiring that the government must first charge you with a crime and then prove your guilt before treating you as a criminal, the right of due process protects you against arbitrary punishments or fraudulent accusations. As long as you have a fair shot to defend yourself, and as long as the government is required to clear a very high hurdle to prove your guilt, with things like requiring proof of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, an impartial judge and jury, the right to cross-examine witnesses, prohibitions against forcing you to testify against yourself, bans on having the state try you more than once for the same crime, only then are we largely protected, not entirely, but largely, from the state's abuse of its power to punish citizens, to imprison us, to take our property, even to kill us. But, as is true of free speech, due process is not only a legal requirement, it's also a societal value. The constitutional right of free speech means the state is barred from enacting laws or taking other action to criminalize or outlaw the expression of particular political views. But free speech as a value extends far beyond that. It represents a consensus judgment that, in general, our society is healthier, our institutions more accountable, our discourse more likely to foster truth if we maximize the values of free inquiry and free thought. In other words, that we safeguard those values not just from incursions by the government, but by anyone and everything. The concept of due process similarly extends beyond its legalistic doctrine. As a society, we believe it is wrong to assume someone's guilt based on mere accusations. Evidence and proof is required before a rational person believes that an accusation is true or regards a person as a criminal based on accusations that they've committed crimes. That is why the mantra ushered in by the Me Too movement, "Believe women," was so offensive to our innate sense of justice. No accusation is entitled to a presumption of truth, especially accusations that attempt to pin on someone the worst possible crimes that can be conjured. Even those who believe that the Me Too movement shed light on genuine injustices, such as the intrinsic difficulty many women face in proving that they were the victims of sexual assault or sexual harassment, given that such acts are often undertaken in private and with no witnesses and leave behind no physical evidence, even they are forced to admit that the Believe Women decree, if taken literally, can usher and has ushered all kinds of grotesque excesses and abuses. The power to destroy someone's reputation based solely on one's say-so is a power far too potent for anyone to wield with no safeguards. All of us, all humans, regardless of our gender, are susceptible to abusing power that is placed in our hands. All of us, at some point, have felt the temptation of vengeance, of jealousy, of having been betrayed or wronged. And the power to destroy the target of our rage simply by accusing them of heinous acts and then expecting our accusations to be instantly accepted as true without question, and having the accused be ostracized and destroyed with no proof, is a power far too dangerous for anyone to wield. Only the values of due process can provide the necessary safeguards. The societal value that holds that accusations will be believed, will be presumed true, if and only if they are accompanied by convincing evidence beyond the accusation itself, and only if the accused has a fair opportunity to defend themselves. All of these crucial values were completely trampled on deliberately almost 2 years ago when the nation's most influential newspaper, the New York Times, published a story that, by design, pinned onto the forehead of one of their ideological enemies, Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz, some of the worst and most destructive labels one can attach to a human being: pedophile, sex trafficker of minors, abuser of underage girls. The passage of time has led many people to forget just how little care or caution the New York Times exercised when deliberately depicting Congressman Gaetz as a sexual predator of children. The paper of record had no evidence when they published this to enable it to conclude that the accusations were true. All they had were leaks from still anonymous sources that Gaetz was being investigated by the federal government for some of the worst crimes that a person can commit. The Times headline by itself was more than enough to destroy Matt Gaetz' reputation. It read, quote, "Matt Gaetz is said to face Justice Department inquiry over sex with an underage girl." Now, one who read the article beyond the headline would not even have known how little evidence existed to suggest this claim was true. To the contrary, the article was written to use the harshest and most blunt words possible to attach them on the most visceral and irreversible level to one's perceptions of Matt Gaetz. In case anyone had any doubts about the motives of the paper, they even somehow managed to mention former President Trump in the very first paragraph of this article, even though Trump had nothing to do, even conceivably, with any of these events. The article read, quote, "Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida and a close ally of former President Donald J. Trump, is being investigated by the Justice Department over whether he had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl and paid for her to travel with him, according to 3 persons briefed on the matter. Investigators are examining whether Mr. Gaetz violated federal sex trafficking laws," the people said. A variety of federal statutes make it illegal to induce minors or someone under the age of 18 to travel over state lines to engage in sex in exchange for money or something of value. The Justice Department regularly prosecutes such cases, and offenders often receive severe sentences. It was not clear how Mr. Gaetz met the girl, believed to be 17 at the time of encounters about 2 years ago, that investigators are scrutinizing, but according to 2 people. Now, ever since publication of that New York Times article almost 2 full years ago, the mere mention of the name Matt Gaetz, one of the very few members of Congress steadfastly devoted to ending the U.S. posture of endless war and confronting and heavily scrutinizing the U.S. security state, just the mere mention of his name prompted immediate accusations that he's a pedophile, a sex trafficker of minors, a criminal, a pervert, someone who clearly belongs in federal prison. It's just a matter of time before he ends up in the cell. Those accusations flowed and flowed and flowed, despite the fact that Gaetz had never even been charged, let alone convicted of any crimes. In other words, this one leak successfully besmirched his name and reputation. It destroyed it in many circles, even though nobody bothered to present evidence that he had committed any crimes. It made it almost impossible for anyone to be associated with Matt Gaetz, lest there be guilt by association that if you're having anything to do with him, interacting with him in any way, it must mean that either you too are a pedophile or don't care about pedophilia. That is what it was designed to do, to render him radioactive without the need for any trial or even any evidence. Now, last September, about 5 months ago, the Washington Post reported, under the headline, quote, "Career prosecutors recommend no charges for Gaetz in sex trafficking probe," that, quote, "career prosecutors have recommended against charging Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida, in a long-running sex traffic investigation, telling Justice Department superiors that a conviction is unlikely, in part because of credibility questions with the 2 central witnesses, according to people familiar with the matter." Now, earlier today, the Justice Department made it official. Here you see from CNN the headline that reads, "DOJ officially decides not to charge Matt Gaetz in a sex trafficking probe." The article states, quote, The Justice Department has informed lawyers for at least one witness that it will not bring charges against Florida GOP Congressman Matt Gaetz after a years-long federal sex trafficking investigation. Senior officials reached out to lawyers from multiple witnesses on Wednesday. A source familiar with the matter told CNN to inform them of the decision not to prosecute Gaetz. Prosecutors working on the case recommended against charging Gaetz in September, in part because of questions over whether central witnesses in the investigation would be perceived as credible before a jury, CNN reported at the time. But the final decision not to move forward with charges came from senior department officials. The DOJ declined to comment. Now, this is not some technicality that happened here as far as why it was that he wasn't charged. The fact that the two witnesses making accusations against him were judged not just by career prosecutors, but by the political appointees of the Biden Justice Department to lack credibility. In other words, to have strong reason to believe they're not telling the truth, goes directly to the crux of whether the accusations are valid. But whatever else is true, this means that Matt Gaetz will never have been charged with any of these crimes that the New York Times caused to be attached to his reputation, let alone will he ever be convicted of them. In fact, because there will be no trial of any kind, Matt Gaetz has no ability and had no ability to defend himself from any of this. All he knows is that the New York Times caused huge numbers of people, millions of people, to believe he was a pedophile and a sex trafficker of minors. He had no opportunity to confront the witnesses behind this, to examine the evidence presented, because none of it was presented. He just sat there having people call him a pedophile every single day for the last 2 years because of what the New York Times did. Aired all kinds of grievous accusations against him, even though there was no evidence to believe that they were true. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.